this is why I want you to pay attention.
Okay.
The greatest demand for slaves in the medieval Mediterranean was concentrated not in Italy, but in Cairo. Okay, so it's known that Cairo took the most slaves, home of the Mamluk Sultan and his amirs. The commanders of his army, the Mamluks, preferred Black Sea slaves for military service. But they also imported, and this is agreeing what you said, they also imported large numbers of African slaves for domestic service, as well as slaves from the Balkans, the Aegean, and Central Asia. So it's 4 locations there. One of them is African. Now let me continue and give you the last sentence. The Indian Ocean, and when they were available, yet within this diverse population of slaves, those from the Black Sea were the single largest group.
Yeah, the Mamluks. What are you talking about?
The single largest group. So I want to make very clear, but I want to.
He singled out one specific era, the medieval Mamluk period, to push a ridiculous claim that Cairo was populated mostly by foreign descendants of slaves. What he conveniently leaves out is the full historical context. The Mamluk Sultanate, which was in power from the mid-13th to early 16th centuries, ruled Egypt, the Levant and the Hejaz, with Cairo as its capital. Yes, the Mamluks themselves were a military elite of foreign origin, often Turkic or Circassian, but that narrow period of 267 years doesn't define the genetic or cultural history of Egypt as a whole.
The single largest group. So I want to make very clear. But I want to make very clear that Cairo got a majority of its slaves from Europe. Do you know what the Mamluks are?
An outright flagrant lie. No, Cairo did not obtain a majority of its slaves from Europe. Even during times when European slaves were present, for instance, under the Fatimid Caliphate, they were never the majority. Cairo's slave population was diverse Sub-Saharans, Nubians, Ethiopians, Sudanese, Turks, and Georgians, among others. To claim that Cairo obtained a majority of its slaves from Europe is historically false and intentionally misleading. Even during the height of the Mamluks, Sub-Saharan black slaves outnumbered Mamluks, Turks, or Europeans by a wide margin. Andy is being deliberately deceptive and selective in his narrative. He cherry-picked a narrow time span of less than 300 years during the medieval era in an attempt to erase or downplay the Trans-Saharan slave trade, which spanned from roughly 650 AD to 1800 AD, and by some estimates involved between 6 and 10 million black slaves. In no way can a mere 267-year Mamluk era override or redefine nearly 1,500 years of continuous slave trading and demographic impact. His argument collapses under the weight of historical reality and genetic analysis. Claims that Cairo became European or foreign dominated under the Mamluks are categorically false. Mamluks nor Europeans never replaced the population in Cairo or Egypt as a whole. Mamluks constituted a relatively small ruling class. Their military and administrative structure was separate from the general Egyptian population. The majority of Cairo's inhabitants, the general populace, remained native Egyptian, including both Muslims and Copts. The city remained overwhelmingly native Egyptian in population, culture, and language. The Nile-based supply system that connected Egypt with Nubia can be traced to the Bay-Qt Treaty of the 8th century, which guaranteed a steady tribute of black slaves. Ethiopians had become much more numerous than other contemporary categories of black slaves. Apart from Ethiopia and East Africa, black slaves also came from the Bilad al-Sudan, or Land of the Blacks, which corresponds to the modern Saharan and Sub-Saharan countries of Mali, Niger, Chad, and Sudan. Genoese and Catalan ships brought between 1,000 to 2,000 black slaves to Alexandria each year during the first half of the 15th century. Why isn't Andy mentioning any of this? What's the deliberate refusal? What's the hang-up? On this important note, we should also add that black rulers in Sub-Sahara would give away black slaves. The record states that black were willing to cooperate with the Arabs. The Arabs export black slaves belonging to various tribes and other blacks who resided near to them and whom they capture. The Black King sells blacks without pretext and without war. The Sultan of Kilwa carried out frequent raids in search of slaves, and his efforts were crowned with success as he lavished them on passing guests as gifts. The primary acquisition of slaves was carried out by local chiefs and merchants, who then exchanged their captives for products that the traders brought with them. Blacks would carry out raids against neighbouring villages for the purpose of making off with captive, would then be sold as slaves. And for the black slaves who had no buyers, their fate was even more horrific. They were tortured and brutally sacrificed, a cruel practice that became a grotesque form of entertainment and ritualized sport for their black African counterparts. Benin, for example, known as the City of Blood, has a long record of savagery of the most debased kind. Here we read an account by Reginald Bacon, 1897. There was a crucifixion tree with a double crucifixion on it. The two poor wretches stretched out facing the west with their arms bound together in the middle. The construction of this tree was absolutely built for the purpose of crucifixion. At the base were skulls and bones literally strewn about the debris of former sacrifices. Down the avenue to the right was a tree with 19 skulls, the result of more or less recent murders, and down every main road were 2 or more human sacrifices. The killing of wives and slaves to accompany the dead man to the next world is not without its redeeming side. But the atrocities of Benin, originating in bloodlust and desire to terrorize the neighboring states, the brutal love of mutilation and torture, and the wholesale manner in which the caprices of the king and juju were satisfied, could only have been the result of centuries of stagnant brutality. But as for Egypt, the slave population of Cairo and in general Egypt across the centuries was predominantly sub-Saharan, not European, not Mamluk, not Turkic. The Trans-Saharan slave trades brought far more enslaved blacks into Egypt than the smaller, more episodic import of European captives from the Black Sea or Mediterranean. Slavery and importation of blacks into Egypt was not officially prohibited until 1877, when the British, under the Anglo-Egyptian Slave Trade Convention, pressured Egypt into officially prohibiting the slave trade, eliminating new imports of slaves from Sudan. So much for being thankful or expressing gratitude. Andy instead resorts to denigrating the British people as well, and Europeans in general. Let's discuss Cairo's population increase from 1950 to 2019. What caused it? Andy and his horde of clapping seals will tell you it is due to foreign immigration or Europeans, but what are the facts? Over the past 70 years, the population of Cairo has exploded from about 2.5 million people in 1950 to nearly 21 million today. The growth of the city has been due to the result of migration of people, usually young men, who come to Cairo from the countryside looking for work. Sometimes they send their earnings back to their families in the country. Other times their families join them once they have found a place to live and a steady job. This trend of migration to the city began during World War II, when the British and the other Allied forces used Cairo as a base for their troops, and the war in Europe created a need for locally produced goods. Many small craftsmen moved themselves and their families to Cairo in response, since prices were high and they were able to make a lot of money. After the war and the revolution, the level of migration remained very high, so that by 1960, the population of the city was nearly twice what it had been in 1947. Another cause of the rapid increase in population has been a lower infant mortality rate, combined with a higher fertility rate and a lower overall death rate, which means that people are having more children who survive infancy. This has contributed to the population increase as well. Using common sense logic, the large numbers of black slaves brought into or migrated into Egypt for more than 1,000 years aligns perfectly with the findings of Schuenemann 2017, noting an increase in sub-Saharan ancestry after the Roman period. This correlation is fully consistent with the genetic makeup of the modern Egyptian population, an indisputable reflection of historical demographic change. Genetic analyses show that ancient Egyptians shared more ancestry with Near Eastern populations than with present-day Egyptians, who have acquired additional sub-Saharan admixture in more recent centuries, amounting to roughly 20% today. This distinction makes it clear that the genetic makeup of ancient Egyptians was fundamentally different from that of modern sub-Saharans. Furthermore, ancient Egyptians show no direct genetic continuity with Ethiopians, who carry greater than 60% African mtDNAL lineages. The laughable notion that East Africans or even Bantu populations were the original ancient Egyptians has been thoroughly put to rest. Pay attention, Andy. We found the ancient Egyptian samples falling distinct from modern Egyptians and closer towards Near Eastern and European samples. In contrast, modern Egyptians are shifted towards sub-Saharan African populations. A substantially larger sub-Saharan African component found primarily in West African Yoruba is seen in modern Egyptians compared to the ancient samples. African, by which they mean sub-Saharan gene flow, in modern Egyptians occurred indeed predominantly within the last 2,000 years. Andy, no. You deceitful lying fraud. You are not the we was you believe yourself to be. So when Andy and the like tell you modern Egyptians are foreigners or Europeans, that is his subconscious admitting that the modern population is a reflection of the ancient population minus the recent sub-Saharan influx over the past 2,000 years. Indeed, the foreigners and invaders are sub-Saharans.
Because I asked you, where did Egypt get most of its slaves? And you named 3 African places. And I'm telling you here, unequivocally, that they got a majority of their slaves from Europe.
No matter how much Afrocentrics tiptoe, tap dance, or desperately obfuscate DNA evidence, the facts remain unshakable. Dozens of genetic studies consistently demonstrate that ancient Egyptian origins were rooted in North Africa and the Near East, not sub-Sahara. The data cannot be twisted to fit modern ideological narratives or wishful identity politics. Ancient Egypt's heritage stands on the foundation of verifiable science, not revisionist fantasy. DNA disproves everything Afrocentrics say.
But yet when people are light-skinned and clearly probably have recent Turkic...
No.
He won't explain it. He can't and never will.
Zahi Hawass.
I don't know who Zahi Hawass is.
Oh, you don't know who he is? No way.
He doesn't know Zahi Hawass is the foremost authority on Egyptian antiquities and one of the most recognized Egyptologists in the world, and yet he's trying to speak on ancient Egypt. That says it all. This is exactly the type of person Andy seeks out to debate. Someone uninformed and easily manipulated so he can posture for his audience and claim an easy so-called win against people who don't truly understand the history. It's a classic Afrocentric tactic: seek out opponents who know little, then twist the conversation to fit a false narrative. Ancient Egypt was never a part of Black Africa culturally, geographically, linguistically, or genetically. The Nile Valley civilization developed within North Africa's unique Afro-Asiatic sphere, distinct from the regions south of the Sahara. Modern genetic analyses have confirmed this beyond dispute, showing that the ancient Egyptians were most closely related to their North African and Near Eastern neighbours, not sub-Saharan populations. The evidence is overwhelming and consistent across archaeology, linguistics, and DNA. Case closed.